So let's talk about simplifying radicals, okay? Now, if you weren't here last time we met, you may struggle a little bit with this because we spent a lot of time on our exponent foldable, okay? So if you haven't watched the video and made your exponent foldable yet, you need to do that as soon as possible, all right? We'll refer to it a little bit today. Mine's right here beside me so I can show you when I need to, okay? So let's just talk about some basics. First of all, that is a radical. What do you usually call it? Square root, right? Why do we call it a square root? It looks like a square root, and that's what we use it for most often. Is that the only thing we use it for? No, that's why its name is radical. Okay? We're going to use it for more than just a square root today, just so you know. Okay? You'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. But if I ask for the square root of 16, what's your answer? 4. Okay, good. What if I ask for the square root of 9? 3. What about the square root of 81? 9. You're comfortable taking square roots, right? Okay? But there's a problem. Because what happens if I ask for that? Do you know the square root of 8? Neither do I. Okay? But I need to be able to simplify it if I ask you to. Okay? We need to be able to simplify it if I ask you to. Well, here's the deal about radicals. There's some rules that you can do with radicals, or inside radicals, underneath radicals, and I need to make sure you know what those are. Because if you know what those are, you know how to simplify this. Okay? I can say that the square root of 8 is actually the same thing as the square root of 4 times 2. Would you agree with that statement? Yes? Okay? Because of the rules of radicals, I can actually say the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. Did you see what I did? I took what was underneath the radical and just separated it into 2 parts. Okay? But what do you know about this part? It's 2, isn't it? I know the square root of 4 is 2. Do you know the square root of 2? Me neither. This is simplified from this. Does that make sense? Now, something from the last time we met, again, so those of you who weren't here, you might struggle a little bit with this. I think you'll catch on pretty quickly. Okay? What if I ask you to do that? What does that mean?
That means square root.
That means square root, doesn't it? Okay? So a to the 1/2 power is the same thing as 2 root 2, because square root of 8 is the same as 8 to the 1/2 power. Does that make sense? So that also equals 2 root 2. Now sometimes I might just need to leave it 8 to the 1/2 depending on the directions. This is radical, this is radical form. This is rational exponent form. Does that make sense? This is radical form. And this is written with rational exponents. Okay, well, which one's more correct? Either one. It just depends on what it's asking for. If I give you a multiple choice question, could you figure out what it wanted? Yes, by looking at the answers that were provided. Could you figure out which one I wanted based on the directions? Yes. So you've got to make sure that you know the directions, or can read, the directions. All right, that's important, reading. All right, but you have to be able to go back and forth between these two, depending on how the problem's given to you and depending on how it asks you to write the answer. Does that make sense? Okay. So, what about this? The square root of 27. Do you know the square root of 27? Me neither. How do I want to break it down? Like, what numbers am I looking for? Like 1 and 27. That's broken down, isn't it? Do I know the square root of 1? Yeah, I do, but does that help me at all? No. So what should I break 27 down into? 9 and 3, that's a great idea. 9 and 3, which breaks down to the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. And what is the square root of 9? 3. So 3 root 3. What about the square root of 24? How should I break that down? 8 and 3? Do you know the square root of 8? Do you know the square root of 3? No? So maybe I shouldn't choose 8 and 3.
4.
How about 4 and
8, 6.
6, right? How about 4 and 6? Isn't that better? Okay. Square root of 4 times 6, which breaks into the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. Do you know the square root of 4? 2. Do you know the square root of 6? Me neither. Just leave it. Okay? So what about the square root of x squared? Yeah, it is. It is just x. Okay? What about x squared to the 1/2 power? What do I do with those two numbers? If I have a power being raised to a power, what do I do with those numbers? So that gives me x to the 2/2. What is 2/2? Aren't these two things asking the same question? Right? Because if you have a rational exponent, the top is, the numerator is the power and the denominator is the root. Does that make sense? Do you remember that? Okay. So what about the square root of x to the 4th y